March 5, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Captain Giles Short, commanding officer of the escort carrier USS Bogue, reviewed the encrypted message from the 10th Fleet. This was not a routine patrol. This was an ambush set from 3,000 miles away. The message contained ultra-intelligence, German naval transmissions, decoded, revealing the precise rendezvous coordinates for the U-boat milk cow supply submarines, specifically U-459 and U-487. For the first time, an American hunter-killer group was not just searching for the enemy, they were sailing to a known appointment. The operations officer reached for the secure telephone. The USS Bogue, supported by 4 destroyer escorts, would sail into the Atlantic, not just to protect a convoy, but to hunt the hunters. What none of them knew was that this single deployment, built on this revolutionary secret, would trigger the most catastrophic reversal in submarine warfare history. It was the beginning of a systematic extermination that would, within months, destroy the myth of U-boat invincibility and force Admiral Karl Dönitz to withdraw his entire submarine fleet from the Atlantic. To understand the catastrophic reversal that was about to happen, one must first understand the grim reality of early 1943. The German U-boat Wolfpacks were not just a threat, they were winning the Battle of the Atlantic. This was their ordinary world. From his headquarters, Admiral Karl Dönitz's U-boat arm was dominant, commanding over 400 submarines. The battle was one of cold, hard mathematics, a tonnage war. In March 1943 alone, Dönitz's Wolfpacks sank over 80 ships, totaling nearly 500,000 tons. By April, that number surged to more than 600,000 tons, the absolute peak of their offensive. The arithmetic seemed to favor Germany. They were sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them. And with 20 new U-boats entering service each month, against fewer than 10 lost, their force was growing. They had nearly severed the vital lifeline between America and Britain. The peril was so profound that Winston Churchill would later write, "It was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war." The myth of the U-boat Grey Wolf seemed unassailable. They were the undisputed kings of the Atlantic, and the Allied lifeline was bleeding out. The U-boat's greatest strength, its coordinated Wolfpack tactic, was also its single greatest vulnerability. This fatal flaw was baked directly into German submarine doctrine, which required frequent radio communication. Admiral Dönitz commanded his entire fleet from France, and this required a constant flow of data, position reports every 24 hours, contact reports immediately upon sighting a convoy, and weather observations twice daily. Dönitz believed his Enigma encryption made these messages safe. He was wrong. He failed to account for high-frequency direction finding. Each of these brief transmissions, while encrypted, was a potential death sentence. It was a radio beacon, screaming the submarine's precise location to Allied Huff-Duff direction-finding stations. Stations that were now mounted on the very hunter-killer ships sailing toward them. The U-boat's greatest strength, its coordinated Wolfpack tactic, was also its single greatest vulnerability. This fatal flaw was baked directly into German submarine doctrine, which required frequent radio communication. Admiral Dönitz commanded his entire fleet from France, and this required a constant flow of data, position reports every 24 hours, contact reports immediately upon sighting a convoy, and weather observations twice daily. Dönitz believed his Enigma encryption made these messages safe. He was wrong. He failed to account for high-frequency direction finding. Each of these brief transmissions, while encrypted, was a potential death sentence. It was a radio beacon, screaming the submarine's precise location to Allied Huff-Duff direction-finding stations. Stations that were now mounted on the very hunter-killer ships sailing toward them. The U-boat road of trials began on May 22, 1943. An Avenger pilot from the USS Bogue, Lieutenant William Chamberlain, detected a surfaced submarine on his radar at a range of 18 miles. His target was U-569, caught in its most vulnerable state, running on the surface at 15 knots, its diesels roaring as they charged depleted batteries. The German bridge watch spotted the approaching aircraft at 8 miles. Alarm bells rang throughout the boat as Kapitänleutnant Hans Johansson ordered an emergency dive. A Type 7C submarine required 35 seconds to get from the alarm to periscope depth. It was not fast enough. Chamberlain's depth charges, set for a shallow detonation, caught U-569 as it was still submerging. The explosions damaged the submarine severely, forcing it back to the surface. A second Avenger was already in position, and the crew, seeing no escape, surrendered. This was the first shock. During interrogation, the 25 survivors expressed shock at the accuracy of American aircraft attacks. They knew exactly where we were, one survivor stated. It was as if they could see through the ocean itself. The hunt was escalating. The American hunter-killer groups were no longer just targeting individual U-boats. They were now systematically attacking the Reich's entire mid-Atlantic supply line. They were hunting the milk cows, the massive Type 14 supply submarines that kept the Wolfpacks fueled and armed. On August 7, 1943, aircraft from the USS Karl demonstrated the lethality of this new strategic focus. They located the milk cow U-117 on the surface. Caught in its most vulnerable position, it was refueling another U-boat, U-66. The supply submarine was caught with fuel hoses still connected, making a crash dive impossible. Lieutenant Charles Stapler's Avenger attacked immediately, dropping 4 depth charges that straddled the helpless U-117. The result was not just a sinking, it was a cataclysm. The explosion of over 400 tons of diesel fuel created a pillar of fire visible from 30 miles away. U-66, damaged by the blast, managed to crash dive and escape, but its vital lifeline and the linchpin of the entire Wolfpack system was gone. The Americans weren't just winning fights, they were winning the tonnage war by destroying the U-boat's ability to even stay at sea. This psychological fallout from the destruction of the milk cows was immediate. Kapitänleutnant Klaus Barkston, commanding U-521, witnessed the fiery end of U-117 from the relative safety of his periscope. The event shook him to his core. His war diary, captured later, perfectly recorded the profound shock and dawning horror felt by U-boat commanders across the Atlantic. He wrote, "The Americans appear everywhere simultaneously. Their aircraft arrive without warning. Their weapons are impossibly accurate." His entry concluded with the single, devastating sentence that defined this catastrophic reversal and perfectly stated the script's thesis. In his own words, Barkston admitted, "We are no longer hunters, but the hunted." The gray wolves were now the prey. The losses began to mount, accelerating into a devastating flood. October 1943 marked a terrifying turning point. The U-boat arm lost 23 submarines that month, including many veteran commanders whose irreplaceable experience, gained since 1939, was lost forever. The destruction of the milk cow supply submarines, U-488, U-489, and U-490, all sunk within weeks of each other, proved especially catastrophic. This was the linchpin's collapse. Without this mid-ocean refueling capability, the standard Type 7C boats could no longer reach the American coast. Their operational areas were forced to contract, shrinking to the mid-Atlantic. This is where the tonnage war arithmetic, once Germany's greatest strength, fatally reversed. This new, smaller hunting ground was not a sanctuary. It was a trap. It was exactly where the American hunter-killer groups were now waiting in growing numbers, ready to pounce. This was the ordeal, the point where the myth of the individual U-boat ace was systematically shattered. Even the best of the best, the most experienced gray wolves, could no longer survive. Consider Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Bleichrodt, one of Germany's top aces, a veteran commander credited with sinking 24 ships. In October 1943, his submarine, U-109, was hunted by aircraft from the USS Block Island. He barely survived the encounter, managing to limp his heavily damaged boat back to port. But the experience broke him. Bleichrodt, the celebrated ace, never sailed on a combat patrol again. His words to fellow officers revealed the depth of this psychological collapse, perfectly capturing the new reality. The Atlantic has become a slaughterhouse. If an ace like Bleikrot was defeated and psychologically broken, it was a clear signal to the entire U-boat force that there was no more hope. Experience and skill no longer mattered against a system that was relentlessly, scientifically, hunting them to extinction. This ordeal phase shows the sheer, brutal desperation of these encounters, captured perfectly in the legendary battle between the destroyer escort USS Bory and U-405. After Bory gained radar contact, it forced the U-boat to the surface with depth charges. Unable to dive, the U-boat's experienced commander, Ralph Hopman, decided to fight it out on the surface. In the darkness and heavy seas, the two vessels collided, the Bory's bow riding up onto the submarine's foredeck, locking them together. What followed was not naval combat, but a surreal medieval brawl at point-blank range. Crews from both vessels fired machine guns, pistols, and threw hand grenades. In a moment of sheer disbelief, American sailors, with no other weapons to hand, were seen hurling coffee mugs, shell casings, and in one case, a sheathed knife at the German gunners. After the vessels separated, the Bory riddled the escaping submarine with over 4,000 rounds of ammunition. U-405 sank, taking Hopman and most of his crew with it, but the Bory herself was mortally damaged in the collision and had to be scuttled the next day. This desperate, almost cinematic fight to the death demonstrated that even the most skilled U-boat commanders could no longer survive against the relentless pressure of the hunter-killer attacks. We now see the truly systematic nature of this new ordeal. The target was U-172, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Hermann Hoffmann, an elite boat with 26 ships sunk, totaling a staggering 151,000 tons. Her crew was considered one of the best in the fleet. On December 13th, USS Bogue's hunter-killer group intercepted U-172 in the mid-Atlantic. The U-boat's position was betrayed by a simple weather report, her transmission triangulated by direction-finding stations. The first attack came from an Avenger, which dropped a FIDO acoustic homing torpedo. U-172's skilled acoustic operator detected it in time for the U-boat to evade. But this high-speed maneuver came at a terrible cost. It drained the submarine's precious batteries. And this is where the magic of the system was revealed as relentless, scientific patience. More aircraft arrived to maintain contact. For the next 14 hours, U-172 was trapped in a desperate game of survival. Every time Hoffman surfaced to ventilate the boat and charge his batteries, he was instantly detected by radar and forced to crash dive. Each dive and evasion drained more battery power. By 800 the next morning, the survival clock had run out. With his batteries exhausted and compressed air reserves depleted, Hoffman had no choice but to surface and remain surfaced. The hunt was over, the execution was about to begin. This was the payoff. A U-172, its batteries dead and compressed air gone, was forced to surface and fight. It emerged into a trap. The circling aircraft were immediately joined by the destroyer escorts USS George E. Badger, USS Clemson, USS DuPont, and USS Osmond Ingram, which converged on its position. The surface battle lasted a desperate 43 minutes. The U-boat's anti-aircraft guns, hopelessly outmatched, fired futilely as the destroyers hammered it with over 400 rounds from their main batteries. The elite U-boat's hull was penetrated in 17 different locations before it finally gave up the fight and sank. 46 of its 57-man crew were lost. The 13 survivors who were pulled from the water provided the emotional climax of this ordeal. Their interrogation revealed the complete psychological collapse of the U-boat force. One survivor stated, "The ocean has become a trap. We cannot hide. We cannot run. We cannot fight effectively. Every patrol is expected to be our last." The tragic hero's despair was now total, stated in their own hopeless words. But this systematic success raises the ultimate question. How? How did the Americans appear everywhere simultaneously? How did they seem to see through the ocean itself? German U-boat commanders were baffled, but Admiral Dönitz remained confident because he held what he believed was an unbreakable secret weapon, the Enigma encryption system. He was catastrophically wrong. This is the ultimate reveal. the aha moment that recontextualizes the entire Battle of the Atlantic. The Germans did not know that back in October 1942, British sailors had heroically captured vital codebooks from the sinking U-559. Those captured documents allowed British cryptomologists at Bletchley Park to achieve the impossible. They broke the complex 4-rotor M4 naval cipher. This was the ultra-secret. Every single operational order from Dönitz to his submarines, every patrol area, every Wolfpack assembly point, every refueling rendezvous was being read by Allied intelligence, often within hours of transmission. The U-boat crews weren't just unlucky. They weren't being hunted. They were sailing directly into pre-planned ambushes, their every move known to the enemy before they even made it. This is where the systems argument reveals its true, terrifying scale. This was the industrial abundance that mirrored America's ability to produce Coca-Cola or Sherman tanks. The German U-boat force wasn't just fighting the skilled crew of the USS Bogue. By June 1943, they were fighting the Bogue, the USS Card, the USS Core, the USS Santee, and the USS Croatan, 5 full hunter-killer groups operating in the Atlantic simultaneously. This represented an industrial capacity that Germany could never match. This industrial might created the final impossible contrast frame, the tonnage war. While Germany was losing its precious, irreplaceable U-boats and veteran crews, American shipyards were launching over 140 Liberty ships per month. That is nearly 3 10,000-ton cargo ships every 2 days. The tonnage war's arithmetic, the very mathematics Germany had relied on for victory, had now reversed into an equation that was impossible for Germany to solve. They simply could not sink ships faster than America could build them, all while America was also building the carrier groups that were systematically destroying their fleet. By early 1944, the transformation of the tragic hero was complete, and the quality gap between the two forces had widened into a chasm. The veteran aces who had formed the backbone of submarine operations were almost entirely gone, replaced by a new, tragic generation. The average age of U-boat commanders had plummeted from 32 to 26. This trend was exemplified by men like 23-year-old Oberleutnant Sir Z. Wolfgang Herder, commanding U-434. With less than 6 months of submarine experience, his boat was caught on the surface by aircraft from the USS Card. Herder made the fatal decision to fight rather than dive, a mistake a veteran never would have made, and it resulted in the loss of all hands. This was the new reality. The U-boat force was now a hollow shell, filled with officers from abbreviated training programs and crews who had never experienced combat. Admiral Dönitz, who ruthlessly sent these young men to sea, was not immune to this tragic trend. His own son, Peter Dönitz, served as a watch officer on U-954. On May 19, 1943, the submarine was caught and sunk with all hands, underscoring the personal, devastating cost of the failing U-boat campaign. This brings us to the ultimate humiliation, the final proof that the U-boat force had been transformed from predator to prize. On June 4, 1944, Captain Daniel Gallery's hunter-killer group, centered on the USS Guadalcanal, forced U-505 to the surface. But instead of destroying it, Gallery had ordered the seemingly impossible. He was going to capture it. In an act of incredible daring that demonstrated complete American dominance, a boarding party from the destroyer escort USS Pillsbury raced toward the damaged circling submarine. The sailors descended through U-505's conning tower while the submarine was still underway and seawater was flooding through its damaged valves. They located and disarmed the scuttling charges, closed the sea valves, and saved the submarine from sinking. The intelligence value was enormous. Codebooks, cipher machines, acoustic torpedoes, and technical manuals all fell into American hands. But the symbolic value was greater. The tragic hero had been captured alive. U-boats were no longer fearsome predators, but prizes to be taken. Their crews prisoners rather than warriors. Section 18. The final arithmetic. The 75% casualty rate. Approx 200 words. Summary. We deliver the final silver bullet statistic that encapsulates the entire story. The human cost is staggering beyond comprehension. Of the 40,000 German submariners who went to war, 30,000 never returned. This is a casualty rate of 75%. 784 of 1,162 U-boats were destroyed. Contrast, frame. The American hunter-killer groups lost only one escort carrier in the Atlantic, USS Block Island, and fewer than 10 destroyer escorts total. The exchange rate, once 10-1 for Germany, had reversed to 21 for the Allies. Psychological angle, disbelief and shock value, the arithmetic payoff. This is the single most powerful and memorable statistic. It's the 82% V1 or Sherman 3,000 kilometer stat for this script. In May 1945, as Germany surrendered, the tragic hero's journey of the U-boat force reached its final, humiliating destination. The remaining submarines received Admiral Dönitz's last order: surface, fly black flags, and proceed to Allied ports. This was the return, but as prisoners, not conquerors. The 49 boats that complied were a hollow echo of the once mighty force. They were not commanded by veteran aces, but by officers younger than 25, their crews filled with teenagers who had never seen combat. In a final, fitting act of systematic dominance, these remnants of the Grey Wolf fleet surrendered themselves to the very American hunter-killer groups that had been preparing to destroy them with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire campaign. This brings us to the final, thematic conclusion, the elixir of bitter truth, which came from the architect of the U-boat force himself. Admiral Karl Dönitz, who spent 10 years in Spandau prison, would contemplate the destruction of the force he had built. His post-war memoirs contain the ultimate admission, the perfect summary of why his gray wolves were exterminated. He wrote, "I had believed that courage and determination could overcome material disadvantage. The American hunter-killer groups taught me that, in modern war, technology and industrial capacity are decisive." His final sentence provides the definitive moral of the entire Battle of the Atlantic. We were not defeated by better sailors, but by better systems. The romantic era of the lone wolf submarine, where a skilled commander could overcome the odds through cunning, had ended forever. The future of warfare belonged to integrated, industrial-scale systems that fused intelligence, technology, and production into a unified, scientific machine of destruction.